Welcome back, everyone. We are super excited to dive into another week of verticals. We've got a killer guest in Todd from Broadlume, so we're excited to dig in with our vertical titan today. But as always, why don't we just kick it off with the vertical pulse? Luke, you were telling me about this article just now. Super interesting one, has huge implications for everyone interested in vertical. Why don't you dive in with it?
Yeah, let's do it. Good to see everybody. So first article today and kind of first roundup here for our pulses. This is an oldie, but it's a good one. So Dave Wan, if you don't know, is founder and partner at Tidemark, super well respected, has been a fantastic early investor and growth investor in a lot of great vertical SaaS businesses. I think he did Toast, he did Dutchy, which we're going to talk about a little bit, and then a few others. But his article talks about vertical software in emerging industries. And, this is something that we don't talk about a whole lot, but anytime you see a new emerging industry, it's almost always a good idea to ride that wave and ride that growth rate with a new vertical SaaS business. And you can obviously take a bunch of learnings in vertical software from what's already working in other industries for, those ERPs or systems of record, because an emerging industry is going to need one just like any other particular company. And so he just spotlights Dutchy, which is a vertical software business for cannabis companies and dispensaries specifically. And so what happened when these guys came out was, Toast and a lot of the more traditional POS providers refused to service, cannabis, right? Because it was federally illegal, a bunch of reasons why. And I think a lot of institutional investors couldn't even touch them because of this. But the whole article just is basically an interview between Dave and the founders of of Dutchy, talking about their journey and and really building VSaaS for emerging industries, specifically when there's like regulation and legal elements involved. So I wanted to at least pose the question, and Nick, maybe you can throw out the first answer. Like, what are some examples for the audience of prospective emerging industries where folks could potentially take advantage of this? I have one on the tip of my tongue, but I'll throw it over to you first.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really interesting about this and is really the fact that there's this consensus around what is an industry, what is a venture backable industry. And the reality is kind of resource that most investors are drawing on when they go to answer that question is what has worked in the past, or maybe what deals have I done. But the reality is there are tons of examples of huge vertical businesses that have been built in industries that when they started, it was not considered an industry, right? Even if there were tens of thousands of, businesses or billions in revenue. I think if you, listeners, if you saw our episode with O'Lear at Slice, that's a great example, right? Everyone knew that restaurants was a huge industry, but who really thought about pizzerias as a distinct industry you could capture? And the reality is, O'Lear and the team at Slice proved that, tens of thousands of business owners. And, Dutchy, LeafLink, I mean, I kind of remember that explosion behind kind of cannabis systems of record. That was maybe a bit of a different one because it was a big industry. There was just that kind of regulatory issue. But I think there are tons of potential, kind of venture scale markets out there that people don't think of as industries, either because they're obscured within a larger industry, like in the case of Slice, or because they're emerging industries, or simply because there hasn't been a winner there before. Another really interesting example, I think, is utilities, right? I mean, that is literally a pillar of the economy, right? Tons of huge businesses. And yeah, it's generally been thought of as a backwater because they're not fast technology adopters. People trying to sell them into them in the past haven't had a whole lot of success, but maybe that changes with what LLMs offer, right? A business actually from my prior firm, Bowery Clear, is a really interesting example there. They're getting a lot of traction in kind of the water utility space. And there are tons of other examples, one of which we'll go into in a second. But I think it's just, if you guys haven't had a chance to read that interview with Dave and Dutchy, it's just a really interesting window into how investor psychology adopts kind of the new industry mentality.
I like it. Your point's a good one too, which is it's not just about emerging industries. You can almost kind of stake your claim in a quote unquote emerging industry by going into a quote unquote sub vertical, right? Like Alir did at Slice. Like there's one of my favorite parts of that episode was he's like, I wholeheartedly disagree with the notion that restaurants are vertical. He's like,
Exactly.
pizza is a vertical. So
And
that's a good point.
and I think you could say the same of a lot of others, right? Like trades. I mean, that's not really an industry, and we'll hear more on this from Todd later in the show. But reality is that's probably at least 50 sub industries. I mean, healthcare, it's probably hundreds, right? And construction, right? What works for the GC doesn't work for the sub, doesn't work for the architect or the engineer, right? So I think it's just, it's creativity at the end of the day and thinking about what could be an industry or what is a hidden industry. And that brings us, I think, into, my next poll submission here. Really interesting business called Moldco. Just raised an $8 million seed led by Cantos and Collaborative Fund. I think it's a great follow on from the point we were just making. So, what Moldco does is it's a digital health platform focused on, health problems related to mold, right? And when you first think about it, it's like, gosh, this is so niche, so focused. And, the reality is we don't really have the proof points yet that this is kind of a massive market, but think about how many homes actually deal with this issue. And if you think about it as contributing to, peripheral pulmonary issues, right? It's actually, it could really be a thing, especially, with kind of the aging infrastructure of our country. So, and then when you do the math of at least how Moldco presents it, of how many people struggle with this, that spend is all kind of encapsulated and obscured by, if you go to your GP or you go to your pulmonologist, right? So in a way, Moldco is almost creating this market. If you think about Hims and Hers did, around certain categories, right? That spending on whatever it is, that spending on finasteride or whatever it is, you were going to your doctor, and that was a huge market. But by hyper focusing on it and capturing it, at the kind of point of spend, they turn it into one and they capture it. So I think I wanted to mention Moldco because I thought it was a great example of what we were just talking about with the Tidemark conversation. What do you think about this one, Luke?
I'm going to pull up my AI because I'm curious to figure this out. I didn't realize that this was big enough to, like, are there enough people with mold related illnesses to create a venture scale company?
Yeah, I mean, so a couple data points we can pull out from this for those maybe not following on the video, but it's a telehealth platform. So, again, they're not necessarily servicing, as with a lot of vertical platforms, they're not necessarily servicing the clinician. It does seem to be kind of a direct to consumer sort of play. I'm not sure exactly whether or not they partner with the clinicians, kind of like in a growth therapy style, but they say average treatment is about $150, $300 a month. And they also mentioned the data point that about 50% of U.S. households show sign of mold, water damage, et cetera. So output of that is really chronic inflammatory response syndrome they mentioned, but more simply, it's ongoing pulmonary issues, right? So what does Grok tell us in the meantime?
Yeah, this is crazy. I didn't actually realize it was this big, and so this is why they were able to raise an $8 million seed. On top of all the other great work that I'm sure they're doing. But it says up to 25% of the population has some sort of sensitization to mold, which is pretty significant. And then the 4.6 million people in the U.S. have asthma attributable to mold. So yeah, it's definitely allergy prevalence, 10% of the population in the U.S. And they're saying roughly 24% of U.S. homes have some sort of mold issue, which is way bigger than I thought. It's scary. I'm going to have to get my house checked.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you just do the math on call it 5K ACV, 5 million people today, and, maybe it's a growth or kind of an undersurfaced market, you might see where they're going. But I think the other interesting, just kind of smaller data point I'll throw or takeaway rather from kind of the Moldco deal here is it was an $8 million seed. And this is maybe dovetailing on some of the conversations we had in the last episode around just how the fundamental structure of early stage financing in the VC world is evolving, in which I see an $8 million seed today, I don't bat an eye. and even just 12 months ago, you might have called that like a mega seed or a hyper seed. And that's just not the case anymore. And the at scale seed funds, or call it the folks in the 100 to 500 fund size range, this is the sort of deal that they're looking to do, right? But it wasn't that long ago when an $8 million round was really a Series A. And maybe it's a semantics game, but things have changed.
Things have changed quick because my Series A in 2019 was $5 million. And I thought that was massive. My Series B in 21 was $9 million.
Yep.
So it changes very quickly, and it's amazing how fast we become desensitized to it.
I know.
They just keep getting bigger. Keep getting bigger.
It's kind of like, I always tell founders, you somewhat got to play the game and at least understand how VCs are talking about what round means what and what they're looking for, just because that's kind of the primitives they have in their brain around where a company should be. But it's almost better just to like ditch the semantics. If you're actually thinking about it for your own business, just what makes sense in terms of how much money do you want to raise, what dilution do you want to give away, and what partners do you want, and how does that align with their fund strategies, right? A lot of the best investors I know just simply don't think about what round is this or what round do I do. So worth a think.
Yeah. So I like this topic though. It's of emerging markets, hidden markets. Like mold, obviously, this company is a definition of a hidden market, like massive market. Very few people talk about, yet we all have experienced ourselves or probably know someone who has experienced, mold at some level in their homes. And historically, that probably just got jumbled in with every other sort of telehealth kind of provider as just one aspect of care that they do. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if it's, big enough to stand on its own 2 feet, or if other telehealths respond if to see some scale.
It's interesting too, because look, I think we are facing, an issue in at least US healthcare today where it's very difficult for most people to understand how should I get care for a certain issue. And, if you have a great GP that, can refer you to great folks, then, maybe you're in luck. But I think this is why we're seeing a rise in, concierge medicine, why we're seeing a rise in, direct to consumer telehealth offerings around tons of different specialties, because, it's very Byzantine figuring out, hey, I've got this thing. How do I get treatment for it?
Yeah. And it's shortcutting a really crappy consumer experience where I had an ankle issue from playing basketball growing up, and I went to the primary, my primary care doctor, and then I got sent to, 3 other doctors or surgeons rather. And I had freaking like 8 appointments before I actually found somebody that could, address the problem. Like it's a maze in the US, unfortunately.
Yeah, totally. So interesting one there. So let's see on this next one, Luke, you want to dive in with your next piece?
This is just another cool company that I wanted to highlight today for the Pulse. Just had a pretty good sized launch on X, and I stumbled across it. I thought they were doing some really cool things. So it's called Handoff AI. It's building an AI workforce. We talked a lot about, AI workforce for X industry and how, it looks more and more like every industry is going to have its own version of this. But it's an AI workforce for residential contractors. It's basically mobile first, so it enables that residential GC to, literally take their phone and it scan, a kitchen if you're doing a kitchen remodel, talk to it, tell it what the client wants, take a bunch of forms and intake documents, maybe inspiration, from Pinterest that the client shared with you, and then it automatically outputs a proposal. It outputs a shopping list, and then it enables the GC to kind of figure out like their margin above the shopping list that they actually want to charge the particular client. And so we'll link the video to this. But it's very, very cool.
It's an interesting one. I mean, obviously you've got kind of the new modalities with, voice and text here, but I think you're also seeing a bit of a blending of B2B and consumer investing in cases like this where, is this a replacement for kind of a Service Titan-like system of record, or is this really a replacement for like a Thumbtack, right? Really more of a consumer-facing. I mean, Thumbtack is both consumer-facing, but it also generates leads for, the service provider. But I think just given kind of the, LM's ability to provide consumers with a different, easy experience, right? You're seeing a lot of blending of like, should we fully verticalize the consumer like this, or just go to the provider.
Yeah, no, totally. I like how this fits in with the ecosystem, and the whole classic debate of like, does the system of record eat this is definitely a take. And do we see evolvement in your quote unquote operating system based on your particular role? This looks like it's really servicing GCs and residential, remodeling GCs and only residential remodeling GCs. So back to, kind of sub verticals versus just serving traits.
Yep. That's a cool one. Well, let's round out the pulse today with one that is a little bit more AI forward. So, if you guys don't know Epic, it's a great Substack, one of my favorites, just on kind of keeping tabs on the frontier of where AI is going. This piece is the huge potential implications of long context inference. To break that down, especially for folks who, maybe are just listening here, really what this is talking about is the ability for LLMs to work with much longer context windows. Context windows is just, a fancy word for how much do they remember about the conversation that you've been having, right? And to what extent does that memory, if you will, tie into the model's ability to learn and answer questions. Taking a step back, we think about the potential future of AI here, whether that's, for vertical use cases or just individual. And we're still not at that point yet where AI is kind of that always on assistant who understands the context of, hey, Luke, you're building a company, you might want to think about this. Or Nick, you mentioned, you might be interested in this type of business, right? It's still very discrete. You kind of ask it a question. Maybe you build a project where it has some of the files, but really this piece is talking about, hey, what if LLMs could have a much higher context window, and would that allow them to kind of be the always on, agent or assistant, if you will. A couple things that's interesting about this. So it would enable, according to this write-up, it would enable more continual learning, right? So like every single piece of context that it gets about you would filter back into the model, as opposed to, even today on ChatGPT Pro, you'll get answers where it will say, hey, I'm only going to do half the work because in the background, you're hitting the context window that they've, established. The issue, of course, is that there's slower iterations on training these models, because at the end of the day, the bigger the context window is, the slower kind of iteration on research is. There are higher costs associated with that. Already with just models today, we're seeing context lengths growing about 30x per year. And it'll be really interesting to see how this kind of drives real world results. There's a lot of great data in here. I don't want to bore everyone with it, but it's worth a peek if you're interested in where models are heading.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think back to Jack from last week's comment about hey, I just want to focus on the customer and reduce friction. It was like the Greco gospel, and I resonated with it. Obviously, this stuff is hypercritical if you're, because the output matters and it changes the customer experience right at the end of the day. But I wonder, this kind of got my wheels turning a little bit. I wonder how likely it is that, these plateau over time. Obviously, every AI company an LLM company specifically is incentivized to say that is not happening. Mm-hmm. But, do you see any sort of slowdown in the innovation that's happening here?
I mean, a lot of people would look at ChatGPT 5 and say, hey, that is kind of the first sign that, we're seeing a bit of tailing off of innovation. But I think the reality is that, look, there are certain fundamental constraints, right? So one is training data. I think already most LLMs have scraped kind of most usable text that's available. There are other modalities, whether that's, imagery, video, voice, first-party data to use. But, that is one. The other is just honestly cost and energy. We recently wrote a piece over at Euclid Insights just on AI infrastructure spending. And it's pretty wild. I mean, right now, in order to, just one interesting data point, in order to recoup kind of current CapEx that is going into AI data centers, the AI economy needs to generate about $800 billion in net new annual recurring revenue just to recoup that cost, right? So obviously, some very smart people see the benefit of having the infrastructure in place. But, even if you just look at the company level cost of training, I don't know, how much do you want to spend on one model? Certainly, we've already hit a pretty high bar. Are we going to spend $1 trillion to train a model. So I think that there's probably going to have to be a cycle of right sizing, of focus on efficiency, smaller models, right, and getting back to kind of the architecture in order to kind of unlock that next.
Are we in an AI bubble?
Well, that's a bigger question. I think that it might be easier to say we may be in an AI infrastructure bubble. And the reality is, like, if you look at the history of infrastructure spending, it tends to be how these things go, right? Whether it's canals, railways, power lines, telecoms, AI data centers, it's kind of all the same. People rightfully see in all those cases, right, the bet was correct on technology and needing to build that out quickly. But, maybe the money comes a little too much too fast and some people lose their shirts. I think maybe the slight caveat here is GPUs are not bridges, right? And the depreciation cycle of GPUs is, you can make the argument it's a couple years at best. If you look at frontier models, how long do they stay frontier? I'd say 6 to 15 months is kind of the range right now. So I don't know. Are people are sucking up the new Blackwell chips? Are you still going to use the hoppers? What are those worth? Now, right now, big tech pegs all their depreciation cycles at like 5.5 to 6 years, right? CoreWeave pegs them at 6 years. That's probably almost certainly wrong. So that's the real question is, the Erie Canal is 200 years old this year, still makes over $1 billion in revenue. Are we going to see a 200-year-old data center be worth anything? I don't know. And probably not, to be honest. So, it's all worth thinking about. But the shining light here is AI revenue is growing extremely quickly. And I think there are a lot of people that will say the CapEx is worth it. And it's probably a good thing for the overall economy in the country to have the infrastructure built out fast.
I saw Brian Halligan's tweet recently. I don't know if you came across this. I think he tweeted it. He said, "Dear founders, it's a good time to sell your company. Love, Brian." Brian Halligan is the co-founder of HubSpot. And he said, "Why? Well, we're likely smack dab in the middle of a bubble. Valuations are good. In previous bubbles, a small minority built amazing platform businesses worth a fortune while the vast majority got nothing. You might be in that small minority." So I don't want to sound alarm bells. I don't think that's a good thing if we are, but
no,
it's back to our opening discussion with like these round sizes getting absolutely massive.
I don't know. What really is a bubble? Is this I think if you look at the .com era, that was truly like a tulip mania sort of bubble, right? I'm sure listeners, you've kind of all seen these charts, but if you just kind of compare valuations to actual cash flow is basically non-existent in a lot of the cases in the .com era. That's very different now, right? Big tech is generating an extraordinary amount of cash flow. And the truth is, if they wanted to cut back on CapEx spending, they could, it's very different today. Could you say that we are in a period of elevated valuations or that there are unique supply issues in the venture market? Yeah, I could buy those. I think I'd be hard pressed to say it's a bubble, but smart people can disagree.
The part that I'd push back on is just how sticky is this AI revenue, even if it's growing really quickly. And that's obviously why both of us are betting on vertical.
Yep.
But I think a lot of these guys the horizontal AI providers are going to wake up and be in a world of pain if something pops.
Yeah.
Or if there's any sort of market correction.
I think I have this in the hopper to chat about next time, but I'm sure you saw, Bessemer's recent report in which they talk about, the galaxies of AI and, they have these profiles for kind of top tier growth. I think they called supernovas, and there were shooting stars. Yeah, everyone's trying to coin the next unicorn term. But one thing I heard, so I was listening to a podcast with Byron Dieter, another with Haman over at GC. These are both kind of Harry Stebbings podcasts, and he likes to ask the question of, is the triple double or treble double, as he likes to call it as a good Englishman, is that dead? Is that not interesting anymore? And that's, again, maybe we'll hit this deeper next time, but that's one I just really can't wrap my head around. I agree. Much faster growth has been enabled, but it is consumer-like growth. And in most of these cases, what you're saying is that it is consumer-like adoption. Now, there are B2B and vertical use cases where, you're seeing that growth too, but typically with consumer adoption comes consumer retention issues. And I think that's a story that hasn't fully played out yet.
We're very high level at the moment. And so we're gonna zoom in with Todd here. He's knocking at the door. Let's let's get our Titan of the week up and running here.
Let's do it. Bring in Todd.
All right, we got our weekly Titan, Todd Saunders here, founder and CEO of Broadlume, recently sold to Syncly, built a killer business, super excited to dig into it. And I was joking before we hit the record button that Todd's the most interesting man in the world, building a software flooring business, but he's super bright, super sharp. We're going to go into a bunch of different playbooks today. And Todd actually introduced me to the company that ended up buying us. So I owe him a debt of gratitude for that. So thanks for being here, my friend.
Yeah, it's a small world. I definitely don't think I'm the most interesting, but I might be the only person to go from Google to vertical software in the flooring industry. So I can definitely hold that title. But yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. So we're going to dig into a couple different interesting kind of themes here. Todd had some really interesting like growth hacks and levers that he pulled that I think a lot of vertical SaaS companies, haven't taken advantage of. But I thought it'd be good just to, Todd, if we can, maybe a quick overview on Broadlume, the story, like the big famous pivot from ad tech, and a little high level on the journey would be helpful for listeners.
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you a mildly abbreviated version, but feel free to interrupt me at any time. Was at Google from 2013 to 2015. Actually met my co-founder at Google in 2014. There's a fun story about that. He, the first year I was at Google was in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and then I moved out to San Francisco. My first day in San Francisco, I meet my team, and there's this guy at lunch outside, like on my team, just like chain smoking cigarettes, and I'm like, why is this guy on the Google campus? This is like a no-no in California. Something's up. So we get to talking. Turns out he had just left a startup in Boston to move out to San Francisco. He'd been out in San Francisco for like 2 months, and he moved from a startup to big bad Google, right? Which, as an early employee at a startup to go to Google, like that's emotional for everyone.
Do no harm, I thought.
Exactly. So there was a big, I'll call it a follow. I'll let them tell their story with you one day. But anyway, that day when I saw him at Google, it turns out that that company had sold for like $75 million, and he sold all of his equity back to the founder to try to like make peace with the situation. So it was the day where he found out he could have had a few $million as like a 25-year-old is the day I met my co-founder. So we worked at Google together for a year, then decided to go start a company called Ad Hoc. We did Techstars. They let us in with 2 non-technical co-founders and an idea to build this like TurboTax for digital advertising. It was a very good business, but it was not. Over time, we realized it wasn't going to be like super venture scalable business. We did Techstars. We did our seed, let's call it, from Zelkova Ventures. We then did an A, maybe they call it a seed, from Founder Collective. That brought us like 2019. The business was doing like 10 million in ARR and like could have been very profitable, but like we were investing a lot in growth. But ad tech had gotten a black shadow over it, I think, at that point. Like no one was investing or building ad tech. There was no outcomes in ad tech. And we were horizontal ad tech. So like the amount of customers we had were like, 50 million customers were out there that were spending money on Google and our ICP or Facebook or all these platforms. But horizontal ad tech platform, like customers stayed around for 6-8 months if you were lucky, and then looked for the next thing that someone was offering them get a cost per conversion of $1, right? Like you can't compete at some point. So we always knew that like we had to find a different angle to this. And honestly, we didn't go searching for it. It kind of came to us. So in 2019, when we raised that round, or 2018, we took a step back and we looked at our like customers for the first time ever. And we were like, hey, we have this like 30% of our business in the flooring industry. And these customers come from this company called Floorforce that's doing websites in the flooring industry. We're doing advertising, and like those customers are like 90% logo retention and like 105% NRR versus the other customers are like 60% logo retention and like 80% NRR, right? Like totally different businesses. So we ended up buying that website company that was running websites for these flooring retailers. And throughout all of 2018, we were like, are we like going to try to be, all-in-one software for SMBs? Or should we like go be vertical SaaS for flooring retailers? Like, which is a little bit scarier at that time. Vertical SaaS, like, no, it was not sexy to be like a niche vertical SaaS in flooring in 2018, 19, 1 and 2. Like, we didn't know much about flooring. So we kind of like meddled there in 2018. Like, what is this? Went to a flooring conference and like totally changed my mind. Like there was a guy with a pop-up banner there, like trying to explain Google ads to people versus the conferences I was going to. Like everyone was just using like data science buzzwords to like say they had the next big thing. So it was like very refreshing. We made a decision in the end of 2019 to pivot the business fully into vertical SaaS for flooring retailers. Funny enough, in 2020, so then March 2020 comes around and COVID hits and our ad tech business would have gone to zero. So like if we hadn't made that pivot, we would have gone to zero. Lucky. Instead, we rode this escalator up because home improvement projects boomed. So our revenue went from 10 to 3 at the end of 2019 because we went all in flooring, got rid of everything else, but then went from 3 to 12 essentially between end of 2019 to 2021. So we boomed back up to where we were, essentially like slingshotted back to where we were before we made the pivot. Make a long story short, we then raised a growth equity round from PSG. They were kind of a minority investor in us. And then we rolled up 7 more vertical softwares for the flooring industry, like website, CRM, ERP, visualization tool, payments, you name it. Kind of built the full stack. And then from 21 to 24, oh man, grew the business to just around 30 million ARR. And then sold it to another private equity fund that's doing a roll up. So what I like to think about is like, I did everything from accelerator. We took angel money. We took Bill Ackman's family office money. We took money from a customer. I took money from venture. We took money from growth equity. We took money from private equity. We rolled up people and I got rolled up. So like
full capital stack.
Exactly. Been through the full capital stack and learned a lot about what it means to work with PE versus growth equity versus VC versus whoever, and grow at all costs and then show profit at all costs. I felt like we saw it all. But anyway, that's my
who's the worst and who's the best to work with
in terms of those classes. I think they all are unique. I think where you lose is you don't understand what their outcomes they want are. Like you're playing a different game. If you're playing a different game than the game they're playing, you're going to hate that class of investor. Like when the private equity guys came in, the first 6 months was a total disaster because I was still in VC world and they were in PE world. And I had to realize like 4-year time horizon, 3x your money. So going to spend like $10 million on product right now, like if there's no ROI,
what are you doing?
Isn't going to work. Right.
Yeah.
So, but then once you brought in like a CEO, a CFO, and we did like revenue bridges and like we really understood like the levers in our P&L and like we started outsourcing a bit, like we were having a PE conversation. All of a sudden the relationship was great. And like we just understood each other more. That's really where people get caught is they don't understand the game that their partners are playing.
I want to get back to that, but I wanted to zoom in on something you said, Todd. So in those early days when you had 30% of your business coming from flooring companies, was that specifically through that one channel partner or were you getting organic uptick as well?
No, mostly that. Anything that was organic was because of what they were doing. Like,
yep,
we really weren't getting flooring retailers directly to us whatsoever. One thing I messed up in there, and again, we're going to take this podcast in a lot of directions, but like made a huge mistake then. In 2019, we bought this business, right? So we ran these 2 simultaneous businesses, essentially like bleeding money because like we were running 2 businesses and had no strategy, really. We were trying to figure it out. And in 2019, we did a riff because it was like, okay, guys, like we're going vertical flooring. Like we don't need 40 account. Well, first of all, our revenue is dropping by 60, 70%. A, but B, like we both have a person of operations. We both have an HR partner, whatever it was. Like it was just 2 businesses going to one. And it was like my first riff that I've done. Now I joined private equity and growth equity world. So there's a lot has happened after. I've done a lot now unfortunately, but the world is so crazy. But the biggest mistake I made in that process was the first riff. And I told the team that if this ever had to happen again, you would know about it so much more in advance. This was like my fault. We need to communicate better. First time founder. I would like owned up to being like, we tried to do our best, whatever. And then March 2020 hits.
Oh gosh.
And like, I was like, I told you that this was going to be like, we were going to tell you in advance and like, we're going to be transparent, but like the world is ending. So like, I'm sorry. And then our company skyrockets. So then we start hiring people like a month later, really aggressively. So like, it was a total just like lesson in communication for me and like not being definitive about anything and whatever. But that didn't start this out on a great foot, let's say.
How did you know? So you had this really successful channel partner. How did you know that like that one channel partner, maybe they were great, but like this is going to be a good market otherwise? Like, did you think that hard about it at the time?
My mantra was never that like we had to be a multi-trillion-dollar company in the TAM. Like at that time, everyone was like, TAM is too small, TAM is too small, TAM is too small. I had one really good conversation with someone that Founder Collective introduced me to. It was a guy at dealer.com. And it really opened my eyes to like, vertical software is not just the TAM of the software, it's the TAM of like the GDP and the money that's going through it. You just need to find ways to monetize all the transactions. And we did some really cool stuff around that I'd love to talk to about and get into. But that kind of opened my eyes to like, listen, I don't even care how many, like there's somewhere between 10 to 25,000 flooring retailers. There's $80 billion spent on flooring in the US. Like this business does $5 million. I need to get this business to like 25 million ARR and I can build like a $200 million business. And my mind was like, if that's what I think is possible here, there's probably way more upside, but I'm generally I know that can happen, right? So I always looked at building the business by like, if this becomes a $1 trillion company, great. And I could defend how it can be, but realistically, I see a path for this to be like still worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And we can all admit that like, that's going to be a pretty good outcome for anyone, that it almost didn't matter to me how big or small or how easily we can get into the industry. Because to build a $20 million ARR business in that big of a space, felt pretty like that was possible, likely.
Yep. Todd's giving me PTSD from 2018, 2019, like being a vertical SaaS founder going out and trying to raise a Series A at that time. It was so beautiful. It was so painful. Like every single now the conversation has totally shifted. And I think most VCs understand that you can build a big business with Toast and others, ServiceTitan, that have done it. But oh my gosh, it was so bad showing up to Sand Hill Road and being like, I'm doing vertical SaaS for trade schools and you're doing vertical SaaS for flooring. And like, I promise you, we can build $1 billion business. It was like 90 no's, 1 yes. You had the same experience.
I think I learned a lot of lessons as a CEO, but one was obviously always like, once I started to work on the business, not in the business, I started to realize that like A, culture critical, but B, like always have investors ready to go, and like your investors are your customers at some point. So like I always had access to money, which was nice because there were a lot of times we took like small checks here and there just to like get past, because at some point I did the math of the cap table and it started to really get to my head of like, I need to efficiently get capital from now on. I can't just like take lump sums or this is going to screw me. But man, a deep secret here is like, I thought we ran great process every time. I thought I always had access to money, and we never got close to running out. However, we never had more than one offer at any round we raised, never once. So like it worked, but like, man, I never once had 2 term sheets for any round that we did or any time we took money. There was never a competing offer. So if you were one of the people that gave us the money, thank you.
Well, you only need one.
Yeah.
What was that? So that moment, which sounds like it was after your acquisition of the channel partner where, you really started exploding. Was that like aligned with you getting kind of word of mouth in that industry, or what was the catalyst?
COVID was a big one because our stores started booming. Like they were making so much, the flooring stores were making so much money that like they could spend a lot. But listen, the company we bought was doing like a few million in revenue as like a website agency company. They had been in the business for 20 years or 10 years at that point. They were flooring people, and they were the most exciting thing they were the thought leaders of the flooring space. When we came in, and didn't just come in, like we embraced the flooring industry. Like I see some of these guys now and they're like, look, we've raised $1 bajillion. We're in flooring. Like come run. Look, don't you know these TechCrunch articles? Like that doesn't work in vertical SaaS. What worked for us is like, I visited hundreds of showrooms. Every retailer had my phone number. Like I got on calls with these guys all the time, and we became like the vision for the flooring industry and the partner for the flooring industry. And like, I think we talk the talk, we walk the walk. And it was very clear that we were like, we are software built for flooring, the flooring industry. I say flooring retailers because we've slowly called it the flooring industry. However, for the first like 5 years, it was like, we only do one thing. And it's like, we only build software for flooring retailers, and we live it, we breathe it. And that was a huge advantage for us generally. But that, when you say like, when did it really like curve up, like that took time to build. But once that momentum started to build there, people like thought of us as like the default, whatever. We're here to stand by the SMB flooring retailer, local retailer. And that kind of helped pour fuel on the fire.
So if you think about founders who are maybe in a similar situation where they're all in on a category, but it's not a category, right, that's reading TechCrunch, what are kind of the top couple emotions that you took in order to really just get your arms around the industry?
Yeah, and I say this like, and I truly believe this day. 51% of the reason people signed up for us was the Broadlume brand, and 49% was the product. I want to answer that question, but just to put in perspective what I'm selling, we went from selling a $300 website a month to a $1,200 website a month to a full platform like website, CRM, ERP for like $3,000 a month. But we had about 4,000 website customers, 3,000 CRM customers, 1,000 ERP customers. What I'm trying to get at is we were selling websites for, on average, $1,200, $1,000 a month to $1 million SMB flooring retailers. So I just want to put that in perspective. Like, we weren't going out there selling $49 websites. Our go-to-market was kind of led in two things. It was content-led and community-led from a lot of it. And I'll kind of explain what I think about each of those. Content-led was like, we produced high-quality content all the time that helped show that we were here to be your partners of flooring retailer. So, for instance, we would have webinars on how to use ChatGPT, how to get your PPP loan, how to tricks you can do in your account. Like, we would do anything to help our retailers move forward that wasn't just like, let me show you a new feature in website software, right? And we essentially used all of that content that we would do through webinars and other things, and we spent our digital dollars distributing that content. We never used digital dollars to acquire customers. It was to get awareness of our content, which then you became a loyal customer of ours. Content was huge. Like, we go to conferences. Conferences, I consider part of our content-led strategy. At conferences, we did 40% of our revenue. However, we spent a ton of money. Why? Because we'd go to a conference. It would be during January and February. Our theme for the year is do the work. Everyone had these do the work shirts. We had this board. Our VP of sales is very good at these activations. We had this like giant board where a retailer would sign the board because they agree to do the work this year, which means they're going to answer the phone all the time. They're going to look at a new website. They're going to clean up their ERP. And we had this like do the work mentality going. We created enough content at those shows, from testimonials to like one-liners to B-roll, that lasted us like an entire year. Forgetting even we had a theme and we signed a bunch of people at the show. But like, that was all content driven and theme and kind of activation driven. And then the other thing that we really did a good job of was like community led sales. And what I mean by that is like, our customers referred us a huge portion of our business. We over-serviced, over-delivered, answered the phone in English from someone that knows something in flooring. You could call the CEO at any point. We made a ton of mistakes, but you always knew that we were going to make it right and that we were here for you. And that created people just wanting to be part of not what we have today, but what we can be tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And they just want to be part of Broadlume. And we created a great community within like Facebook. We had our own conference called FloorCon where we, like, people would come and like bring their families, and like at FloorCon, you would buy anything we had to sell you, and we could do no wrong for almost 8 months after that because you were still in like a days on how amazing. Like,
you had Tim Tebow at one of them, didn't you?
That's the thing. It's like, you go to a flooring trade show, you're petting carpet. You come to FloorCon, you got Tim Tebow, you got Andrew Yang, you got Joe Gibbs, you got like a whole list of people. Al Doan, who I met on Twitter, who's the king of quilts, super interesting guy, amazing speech at FloorCon. Like, these guys, it was a totally different environment. So we were, again, more than a software company. We were like, we will fight to the death on behalf of you and do whatever it takes. And I think that mentality created this really good community. And that with the content was really what like took us really, really far. We only got into like outbound sales towards like $20 million at ARR. Like, everything else was mostly warm.
Luke, you've got a bunch of really interesting questions around the community piece. So I want to come to that in a second. But as you think about those early days, like, you didn't necessarily come from the flooring industry, may have been a side passion, but that wasn't your domain expertise at Google. Did you have co-founders, early hires? Like, when did you think about infusing domain expertise, if you did?
When we acquired each of those businesses, they came with like a team that like essentially every software company in the flooring industry was like X flooring retailer or X manufacturer starts a software company, has been running it for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So what we were buying was like 50% customers, 40% like thought leaders and like door openers and like domain expertise, and then like 10% product. Like, you might be able to argue it's the opposite because we were able to cross-sell, but we weren't buying like world-class products. They were good and they fit in our stack, and we kind of, there's an argument of like, do you build a platform or do you build an ecosystem? And we were definitely more of an ecosystem where like it worked together, but wasn't like a seamless service titan like platform. But each of those leaders at those companies can open the back doors to anything. Like, when I know that we had made it to the other side was like, I was in the room late at night when the manufacturers and big retailers are hanging out and having the conversations that like everyone thinks happens, but don't know where it happens. I was in those conversations. So like, once those doors start to get open, you can start to find lots of different sales channels and partnership opportunities. Like, we have a huge partnership business. So anyway, that's kind of, I woke up one day and I was like, okay, these last 2 days I've been in the right side of this equation. We've made it past this trust line of the inside.
So let's say you're a, kind of under 5-person business, super early days, and you're mapping that out. I mean, obviously to get to the point where you're acquiring businesses or you're in that room is probably a few years away. Do you think that bringing on domain expertise in like customer success, or just purely to like run booths at the conference or sales, like where do you think it's most critical in early days?
Listen, I think like we got lucky that the company we acquired, there was the CEO of that business is now our CIO, and like we had that behind us. However, like, I think if you have a deep passion for learning and like you're spending your next 10 years in this industry, you might as well like go all in. So like, I want to say that even without him, like, people laugh. During onboarding, every customer got my phone number. On Facebook, I posted it all the time. Anyone had a question, like, please call me. I listened when I was at work. I would listen to calls that consumers would call our flooring retailers so I could understand what they were doing. So like, I don't know. I feel like if you're in vertical SaaS, you got to know that your TAM is smaller, fine. Your growth is smaller, fine. But you can have high retention, high NRR, but you have to get in. And if you can't the only way to get in is to like be one with your customer, especially these niche industries. You have to like really go deep on the domain expertise. That like, a part of me was like, that's my job, right? It's like I just became obsessed with it. I could go higher, and I was lucky that I had John, our CIO, and we got more and more people. But like, I got a reputation of like, you could call me and I will talk to you for 45 minutes. And at some point, like, I sold in a showroom. We had content called like The Dealer, where like we'd go to your showroom with a big dealer, and I would go and we would like go help you like reshape your showroom. And like, we had all types of interesting ways, but it was, we had a reputation of like, we were all in on the flooring retailer. I think you can do that with or without like having the domain expertise day zero. Like, that's just there's an easy route, but if you're serious about the next 10 years of your life in vertical SaaS, like, you just got to do it. I don't know.
Do you have any opinion on hiring like SaaS focused sales reps or SaaS focused CS reps versus hiring them directly out of the industry where they come with the knowledge and then you teach them, SaaS stuff? Like, that was a big unlock for me. Is our retention was struggling, and then I finally said, I'm just going to go hire like our best customers, VP of enablement that implemented our product and implemented every other software solution into that particular school. And like, our retention grew 40% in 24 months with her. I was like, why did it take me 6 years to figure that out?
I don't know if I have a strong opinion. I mean, I think you need those people internally. Like, they are like the shepherds of new folks that come into the business. But I don't think we were strictly one way or another. I'm thinking about our sales team. Like, they're all over the place. But listen, our sales team, funny enough, has been with us for I think most of those guys have been here for like 6 or 7 years. So like they're flooring experts at this point. But I don't think like, listen, if you're 5 people, I think getting domain expertise is great. Hopefully when you're 20 people, you have enough domain experts that like they can help a new person become a domain expert. But like, I mean, seriously domain expert. Because if you're not, you just get sniffed out and like totally fail. I don't know. Listen, I think a lot about this now. Like our internal culture was just being obsessed with helping these people. And people saw me, a customer had a problem. I'll be on a call with an account manager and a customer. And that led it so that after the call, the customer felt great. But the account manager was like, holy shit. Like our CEO is like talking LVP flooring with this guy and like totally calmed him down and like is so serious about this. And like why I think that inspired them to then go act this way. So like I didn't appreciate it at the time, but I think our internal culture was a breeding ground for other people to really care about the space because they saw other people really caring about the space and what we were doing, which then I think our customers felt, which I didn't appreciate at the time, but looking back, like, man, I don't like, that's just blood, sweat, tears.
And you think that all came from you kind of leading the charge, being willing to jump on, you know, any call, posting your phone number? It's like, is that how that got baked in?
What we noticed in flooring was like we marketed the company, but we also marketed people. So like myself, my co-founder, and John are the first CEO we bought. Because we bought other CEOs that were in the flooring industry, but us three were like, our faces were everywhere. So like it humanized us a lot more. Like I think people might know my name just as much as they know Broadlume's name or John's name more than they know Broadlume's name. So yeah, I think that played a huge portion in it, but not just me. I think a face is important as long as that face is willing to like not just be there and be gone 3 months later, because then that's going to be an issue. So yeah, I think putting a face to it is important.
Well, maybe let's get back to that core community point. So maybe just as a entree, how did you figure out where these folks spend time? I mean, you were an ads guy, like I would imagine maybe Google Ads wasn't the best place where these folks, were easiest to get.
Conferences, Facebook groups. We ran the largest. Here's what we noticed. Flooring retailers go to these trade shows, all Q1. Everyone just showed up and showed the same beige carpet. Yet all the retailers would say they just show up not to see the same beige carpet, but because all of their friends in the flooring industry are there, and it's the one time to share ideas and da-da-da-da. And then you realize, like, there's no content at this place. Like, they had a content track at one of these trade shows, and it was, like, me standing on a step stool, like, yelling about something, and, like, no one was It was, like, terrible. So, like, they were like, oh, well, let's launch a Facebook group. And then all of a sudden we had like thousands of these retailers in a Facebook group sharing ideas. And like I was in there like answering questions, nothing to do about websites, but people saw me everywhere. And it was always me. No one was doing it for me. Like, I'm thinking about opening up a new store. Like, what would you do? And I'd be like, cool. This is before ChatGPT. So I'd have to actually give an answer that like I thought of and like whatever. So that created a really good community.
How'd you get the flywheel going in the Facebook group? That's something that I see a lot of people like. Was it so? We talked to someone last week and they were talking about like rabid, demand. Was it just they've had such a thirst for this and there wasn't anything there that it happened organically once you got enough people in there? Or were you kind of?
There was that. We also had a big customer base in which we like pushed it a little bit, like on onboarding, like, oh, send up our Facebook group, whatever. The name of it, when we changed the name of it, it blew up because people search for like specific when originally it was like Beat the Box Stores, which was a campaign we ran. And then we changed it like the flooring retailer group. And that like retailers found it, like SEO wise, found it to get in on Facebook, which was huge. I did a little bit of a hack on like, I personally unfriended almost all my friends on Facebook. And if you go to my personal Facebook, it's all flooring retailers that were in some other like random groups. And if you're friends with them on Facebook, you can then invite them to groups that you're in. So I would friend all these people and then invite them to the group as much as possible. And we would do things to like incorporate like, let's say there's a really good thread about like opening up a second store. I would take that content, put it into like a newsletter type format and be like, send it out to our customers and be like, we thought this piece of, or a video, like thought this piece of content was interesting. This was going on our Facebook group. Let's talk about it. So we put a video about it, but we'd reference the Facebook group. So we invested in it because we knew it was our monopoly, not the right word, but like our distribution channel that no one else could get access to. And it was on Facebook. So whatever, Facebook had it too, but like it was our owned distribution and we were willing to grow it as silly. Like we talked to our investors about it. It was like silly, but like, that was our way of, we could at any point I could hit at everyone and I could ping 4,000 flooring retailers and get them to watch or read something. That was
This is so important because I think most founders, the strategy is we're going to do one webinar a week and we're going to do 5 social media posts a week. And we're going to they do the most BS, content marketing, and your approach to content is way different. Like even the Cluely guys, the 19-year-old kids who've raised money for their startup, the thing I think they've gotten so right that I've kicked myself looking in the rearview mirror now is they're like, why am I hiring a traditional B2B marketer who has zero proof in ever building a community when I can hire a 19-year-old kid who has 200,000 followers on TikTok and actually knows the muscle? And I'm like, why was I doing the playbook? The playbook is horseshit.
Our marketing team was always 4 people. It was a VP of marketing, a marketing manager, and 2 video people. And we were just churning out really high quality content
all the time. Huge.
All the time.
Huge
Our
quantity.
first FloorCon we did in 2020. We did it digitally. It was filmed so well. We did this YouTube premiere where you can watch it as a movie or whatever. We had 700 people watch live. We sent you gift boxes that you opened up during it, and there was a 50-50 raffle. You had to be online to get it, and it was and it was such a hit that we knew that FloorCon a conference was going to be a thing next year. But video took us so far in so many different ways. Content, really, not just video.
It's a huge unlock.
Did you have engagement between community members on the group? Was that a big?
Well, that's all it was.
That was a big part of it, right?
That's 99% of what it was.
How did you get them to, did they go on there to ask questions to peers or?
Yeah, all the time. At first, I had to seed a little bit and almost prompt some questions, but at this point, it's
it's a flywheel. Yeah.
I'm looking to hire someone, or I need 2 boxes of this, or this. Listen, Broadlume sucks. Anyone have an alternative? I love those. I do, because when our brand was great in the market. Let me rephrase it. When our brand was at the peak in the market, that post, we'd have 100 retailers responding, and I would respond and say, listen, I'm so sorry. We can't be perfect, but we try to be. Here's my phone number. Please call me. I would say 50% of the time that person would leave that call and be like, I wasn't that actually unhappy. And they sign up for something more. And they're like, holy shit, I can't believe you called me. I didn't really mean to be that rude. 25% of the time they would just cancel. They would delete it. They were like, I'm sorry. And then sometimes they were actually mad. But even those gave me a chance. And then sometimes they would post I cannot believe it. The CEO called me. Turns out it was a misunderstanding. And it almost became for some people, they don't like it because people then felt like they could just post on Facebook whenever they wanted to get my attention. And you know what? Okay.
Yeah.
I was fine with it. It created a little bit of an ops mess and whatever. And we were trying to get our tickets, but we were your partner. And if you felt like you wanted to reach me on a Facebook group, you could reach me on a Facebook group pretty easily.
So many amazing takeaways here. I want to pivot a little bit to some more stories because you've had many of them, and then I thought it'd be cool to do a quick idea jam. I know Todd meets with a bunch of interesting VSaaS founders. He sees a lot, and so I think that'll be super fascinating to talk about. What do you have any exits, war stories or big round war stories? Term sheets getting pulled. I'm sure there's folks listening that are going through a really, Elon Musk style, they're eating glass right now.
Yeah.
It wasn't all up and to the right.
No, never. I mean, some days, I guess. Everything. I would say everything that you're saying happened, recuts of deals falling through. We had our Series A lead investor pull out at the last minute. If we didn't get a bridge round from one of our customers, we would have not been in a good place. I would say there's a lot of those. I would say generally though, without going to all the individual specifics, the biggest eye-opening thing to me at my business was 6 years in being okay, I want to change the world. I also want to make money. I'm doing this because I want to make money. And let's just be, I matured to a point where I was life is too short. I just want to make sure there's an outcome here, or else cool, I learned a lot, but I really want an outcome. And once I understood, and Luke, we've had some conversation about this, but once I understood the cap table more, it helped me understand what my investors were going through and what I was going through, what I had to optimize to actually have happen, and what decisions I had to make in order to make that stuff happen. Because you could go down a path and just work for 10 years, raise a lot of money, and look really successful and see nothing. And I was kind of heard that. And then once you kind of you see it to yourself, it kind of opens your eyes. So like, I will say, if you're a founder listening to this, like, and you're thinking about where to fundraise, how to fundraise, my advice is like, look at your cap table, be realistic on what this outcome can be, and realize this: 95% of you are going to get bought by private equity. Whether that's a private equity backed sponsor, roll up, 5% are going to get acquired by some, of the people that get acquired, 5% will get acquired from some really synergistic, player that'll pay some ridiculous premium. But most you're going to get bought by some form of private equity. And like, if you don't do your cap table right, they can never buy you because your cap table is so screwed up. And if they do buy you, you're not going to like it. So like, at least give yourself optionality as you think about your fundraising on like, hey, if you raise this round, cool. But like, by the way, if someone offers you 70 million for the business and you own 20% and it's like a 10x return for your investors and like you walk away with like 10 or 14 million bucks, like pretty good, versus you take this check and now you have to sell for like 200, and realistically, like even if you do with dilution, you now make like 18 million. And like, by the way, all PE is now not going to talk to you. Like,
and by the way, everything has to go right to, like, Todd was so instrumental to me years ago in this exact topic, because I think what most people don't realize is they're like stuck in their head that I'm going to sell at 10 times ARR because that's what all these VCs are paying for my business. And you have to, I call it having an escape hatch. Like and it's funny because the escape hatch is actually the most likely outcome, right? Which is some PE fund is going to pay like 4 to 6 times, maybe a little bit more. Maybe it's 7 if you're really kicking ass. Maybe it's 8, but like optimize so that you selling at 4x is life-changing for you. Like that's got to be your baseline.
Yeah, I think it's hard. Listen, you have to realize the investors can pay 10x because they're placing 100 bets and one's going to do 100x and they're going to cover the loss for a lot. Which is, listen, I'm not saying one way is right or wrong. I'm just saying you have to know the game you're playing. If you don't know the game, like you're going to wake up, you're going to raise 100 million bucks, and you're going to be like, cool, where are my buyers?
I think like I totally agree with all that, and frankly, like if you just look at the history of venture, I mean, it's maybe come down a little bit, but M&A is the majority of the outcomes. And I think there are a lot of funds and investors out there these days where I look and I'm like, you've got to get like 10% of all exits in venture for this to be a good fund. It doesn't, that's not how we've architected our fund either. But I think there is also a trade-off these days of like, okay, if you're growing like 3x year over year, or, let's say you get an offer for a Series A that's multiples of what a sponsor is going to pay you, like how do you measure that, right? And I think you make a really good point of like, you should look at the dilution, you should look at what that partner wants.
And let me be clear, like if you're going, like we were a 50% grower from essentially 20, like we became vertical SaaS, high sticky, good NRR, upsell, but like we became a 100% grower, 60% grower, 30, and then we kind of compounded like 30 to 50%. So like, listen, if you're growing really like 300% or 100% year over year, and like you have some real revenue, not like hundreds of thousands, your world's your oyster. I'm talking to the like 95% of other people, I think,
that are growing 20%.
Yep.
Yeah, well, you have a good business, but like you got to recognize what's happening here.
Do you think, looking back, and was your assumption around kind of the size and potential scales in that market pretty much on pace, or did it end up feeling bigger or smaller?
To make a long story short, I always knew we could get into the transactions. First of all, my answer was I didn't care. I was naive. Almost as a second-time founder, I care more, which is making it hard to start something, because I'm like doing too much math, versus like being naive is like way better. So like being naive was great, 1. But 2, we looked at the transactional revenue as a big opportunity. We did it in an interesting way. At some point, we had 4,000 flooring retailers' websites, 20 million consumers hitting those websites. And what we realized was that manufacturers wanted access to these consumers. So we started to sell, like, I don't want to call it ad space, but an elevated experience amongst your brand's manufacturer on this retailer's websites if you pay us X amount of money. Well, it started to work really well. We said, hey, rather than giving us $20,000 a month to kind of circle your brand with this elevated experience across 4,000 retailer websites, why don't you cut us into the transaction? Because you're giving it to a distributor, who's giving it to a distributor, who's opening up accounts for you. I can just open up accounts for you by like emailing my account managers, and like you're going to have accounts open. And we had a big deal in place with a large manufacturer. they at the last minute were like, hey, we're going to come up with 10 new brands and we're going to try it with these 10 new brands so we can measure it. And I was like, hold on, if we do this with you in 10 new brands and then someone else 10 new brands, like I'm creating 100 brand new brands. Like this is chaos. So we said, hey, why don't we create 4 brands that we own? You guys make whatever products you want. Give me 20 products, you give me 20, you give me 20. And that's how I'll measure what happens over 4 brands, not 100 brands of, you essentially get back in the same situation. It's just like a bunch of commodity brands and products, and like then it's nothing. So this is in 21. Make a long story short, we launched our own brand of flooring. We didn't carry the product. We didn't hold the product or make the product. I wake up a year later and 100 showrooms are carrying 1,800 SKUs of our products. And instead of making, where I'm going with this is like payment processing, you want to make whatever, a full basis point or 75 basis points maybe on the transaction. I was making 10% on the transaction, holding no inventory, and like it was essentially the same as payment processing, but I was taking 10 points because I was like the gatekeeper between manufacturer and retailer to open accounts and sales. However, when you go to sell to PE, they're like, cool, what the fuck is that? That's like reoccurring weird revenue. I'm going to give a 2x multiple. But then they buy you and mark it up to recurring revenue at 8x multiple and, you know, find a way to funnel it somewhere else. But like, it was a lesson that like it was good for the business. Was it good for our enterprise value to the private equity fund we sold to? Probably not. Like, they weren't buying that. They didn't like that part of the business because it was transactional and too close to the physical product and not close enough to software. But like,
But then when you sold it again, it was all of a sudden SaaS revenue again.
yeah, of course. It's like payments. I think I wrote about this a few days ago. Payments, like payments is reoccurring revenue before you sell, and then after you sell, it's like recurring revenue at an 8x multiple. It's like,
but it's so important. This is such an important thing. Is like you can't just take a per seat fee and times it by the number of people in the market. Like you have to get a percentage of the revenue that flows to the market. That's how vertical SaaS companies become massive.
and there's a lot of ways to do it. Launch your own product, fintech, payroll. There's a million ways to do it. I just took our head down and said, we're going to have a fuck ton of websites, a ton of retailers, and we're going to, these retailers represent like $30 billion of sales. Like, and there's 20 million consumers hitting these websites. I promise you we can make money on that. And now I think the playbook is more defined of like monetizing the network. Back then, there really wasn't a full playbook that I would say now is like pretty well documented on like the opportunity there.
All right, let's pivot. Let's do the last couple minutes here. Ideas. I know you talk to a ton of different founders. You've seen a lot of different businesses. There's this whole, craze around AI roll-ups. There's a lot of stuff going on. Like, kind of, what are you thinking about? What are you seeing? What's interesting that you're excited about?
Yeah, man, I can't see any more like AI phone call reception agent for like HVAC people. Like that's personally exhausting me. I just see like so much of it. There's no defensibility. They have a little bit of domain expertise. But like, I get the, like, if this is your wedge and you have like some other thing of like, we're going to sell these guys right away. Like I'm into that. But that to me, like I see a lot of founders be like, cool, look, there's AI in my vertical SaaS product. And my response is like, hey, by the way, like these guys use pen and paper. And like, if you just build like a half decent product and like you answer the phone in English and like you become really good friends with them. And instead of trying to squeeze a 90% margin out, gross margin, you have like a 80% margin and like, then use AI internally to make yourself more efficient. That way you can spend more money on R&D and customer service and whatever versus like jamming this like AI product down the throats of your customers because because it sounds good to your investors, but truthfully they just need like a pretty good CRM with good UI UX. Like I just see that all the time. And like I know that's the way we're going, but in vertical SaaS, there's a different approach, I think, how to leverage AI, at least for the world we're in right now. Your customers are trying to go from pen and paper to the next genre. So that's kind of one thing I see. And listen, the other thing I see is like the private equity roll-ups have gone through so many verticals that I think there's this new wave of opportunity where like all of the NPS scores are now down to 0 in every vertical. So like there's never been a better time to like go build vertical SaaS because they've all been bought up. So like you now rise from the ashes. And like it's the model to me be so easy. Like your operating costs are a lot cheaper because of AI. You have a great product. You can move faster. You have real customer support on the real phone. And like almost the opposite of AI and outsourcing, like is how you can just win and take 20% of these, large PE customers all over again. We're like back to the
Yeah.
cycle, back to the ground. And like in 3 years, these companies will then be mature and it'll be harder. But now it's like pick an industry and go after it, right?
Founders probably, probably mainly you can blame this on VCs have kind of been trained to say, well, like don't go after the system of record or don't replace the ERP because that's going to be a lot. Maybe we'll do it later. Like find a better wedge, which sure, there's a lot of logic there, but yeah, I mean, you look at where the NPS scores are on some of these systems of record and like how much faster could you rebuild that thing now, right? It's starting to feel pretty interesting to say, look, maybe you just you eat the frog and you go straight after it.
Also, the premium that people pay on ERP and SaaS, specifically in private equity world, is like 10 times more than if you're a point solution.
And for good reason. I mean, look, a lot of these kind of AI wedges are going to run into that wall where it's like, I mean, we see this in healthcare, right? Like even a bridge, which has raised, $1 billion, like, what are we going to do? Are we going to become an EHR? I don't know. Like, folks are going to hit that one way or the other eventually in most markets.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Listen, I'm really interested to see how this kind of tech-enabled service approach phase out and how like this vertical AI stuff kind of keeps going. However, like outside of all of that, if you just offer a good product to people using pen and paper, answer the phone in English and actually answer the phone, like, and be knowledgeable about the product, like you can go take the 20-30% of customer base and have a really good business because the private equity fund that own these companies are worried about one thing, and that's cash flow.
Yeah.
And like they'll lose X amount of customers as long as they can dial up the pricing notch on other customers. And like that's your opportunity. And I think there's just like a golden opportunity to almost go backwards to go forwards, I guess.
I love it. So Todd proved my point at the beginning of the show. He is the most interesting man in the world.
No,
absolutely.
Yes, maybe next time I'll try to prove that, but I appreciate you guys having me.
Thanks for being here, man. It means a lot.
Yeah, I appreciate it, guys. Anytime you need someone, let me know.
Awesome. You're the man.
Good to see you, Todd.
All right.
Thanks, buddy.
All right. That was a great one. Always a pleasure to see Todd, aka the most interesting man in the world. And yeah, great lessons on vertical community building, replace the pen and paper, answer the phone, own your market. And yeah, I mean, I learn something new from him every time we talk to him. So I'm glad we could get him on the show. So with that, that's a wrap for our show this week. But as always, just want to give a big shout out to Paraffin. Paraffin, for those of you who don't know, is who makes verticals possible. You should check them out, but they provide financial products to help merchants grow. Really relevant for vertical software businesses, embedded capital, embedded spend. They help drive revenue, retention, TAM for your business. So, vertical software AI folks, check out Paraffin. Thank you to them for making it happen. And thank you to you, the listener, for joining us. We'll be back next week with another killer episode, and we'll see you then.